Episode 7 of The Chosen Season 4 was the best episode of the season so far, and it's definitely among the best episodes of the entire show, not only because the most awaited resurrection of Lazarus happened, but also because the shortest verse in the entire Bible, Jesus wept, was brought to the screen in a perfect way, with Jonathan nailing all the emotions one would expect from that scene. Episode 7 also had a great flash-forward scene with older Mary Magdalene and Matthew, and had good scenes dealing with how different disciples reacted to what Jesus did with Lazarus. It was especially interesting to watch how characters like Judas, Thomas, and Thaddeus were all reacting in their own unique way. I can talk about this for hours, but this video will focus on that short scene where Jesus weeps after seeing Mary and Martha and hearing their cries about their brother's death. Did Jesus weep because of his friend's death, or because he was sad about Mary and Martha's reactions, or was there something else going on? Let's do an analysis, shall we? The easiest verse in the Bible to memorize, Jesus wept, seems simple, but raises too many questions. Why would Jesus cry? He was God in the flesh. Yes, he had challenges, but he still knew how all of this would end. Why the tears? We should look at the context of what was happening to understand the reasons behind his weeping fully. Towards the end of his ministry, Jesus received news of his friend Lazarus' death, but when the words arrived at him, Jesus didn't immediately take action. He waited 2 days to travel to the area. Once he finally arrived, he was faced with Mary and Martha, who were both angry at Jesus for not coming early to save their brother. In John 11, Martha says,
"Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died."
A few lines later, Mary cries at Jesus' feet and says the same thing, "Lord, if you were here, my brother would not have died." At this point, there were many people gathered who were watching this interaction. Here, Jesus was very moved and he wept. At first glance, it looks like Jesus wept after seeing the suffering of his friends. He was a guest in Mary and Martha's house. He knew and loved them. So it was deeply moving for him to see their pain and suffering over their brother's death. Even though Jesus knew the fact that Lazarus would be raised in a few minutes, he still felt their pain because he was empathetic to their loss. His weeping here shows his true care and love for the people. Just like a father who does not want to see his children in pain, Jesus too did not want to see Mary and Martha in pain like that. We can say that Jesus wept because those he loved and cared for wept. But also, a good point to understand is that Jesus wept also because he knew that his friends who were crying over Lazarus now would be crying for him just a few days later. Seeing their reactions to Lazarus' death, he might have realized how much they would cry and grieve over him once he was crucified. The other reason why Jesus wept is because he witnessed the lack of faith around him. Throughout season 4, especially in later episodes, Jesus has been complaining about how his followers don't understand him and what's going to happen.
And my followers will not understand. I have told them 3 times. It's as if they're incapable of hearing it.
They're always in denial about what will happen to Jesus in a few days, even though he says it plainly over and over again. They don't want to understand. When he told his disciples that he was going to see Lazarus again, they reminded him that it would be dangerous. They acted out of fear, not faith. Even with Mary and Martha too, since it was already 4 days after Lazarus' death, they didn't believe their brother could be saved. When Jesus told them their brother would rise again, they thought, of course, he would rise on the day of resurrection just like everyone else. This was also a problem of faith. Jesus had to assure them that faith should be their primary concern at that moment. In front of the tomb as well, people still concerned themselves with trivial matters like the smell that would be coming out of there. Jesus wept because people around him refused to acknowledge what was right in front of them. All he wanted was to see the faith of the people around him, but he couldn't find that at that moment, which created another important reason for him to cry. Of course, as you might have guessed, there's another reason for Jesus' weeping, and that's his coming suffering. Jesus knew that the resurrection of Lazarus would be his final sign and that his own death and resurrection would come within a few days. He knew what would happen in the end, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't be a difficult road to walk. He had to suffer and he had to endure pain. A At that moment, he knew all of this and wept under the weight of knowing it. As implied in the show, he knew that raising Lazarus would cause religious leaders to take action and put him to death. In a way, saving his friend and bringing him back to life meant that he was sealing his own death, which must be such a hard burden to carry on one's shoulders. Also, we need to remember that crying is a bodily function and demonstrates that Jesus was also a human, as The Chosen has been emphasizing in the latest episodes as well.
Also human.
Within his two natures, Jesus wept for Lazarus as a human and later raised him from the dead as a divine being. The crying with Mary and Martha also worked to show the humbleness of Jesus, something emphasized over and over again in the Chosen series, which I find quite impressive. He did not look down upon people and their suffering and never feared to be on their level. The scene showed his empathetic and humble nature, in my opinion. In the end, what I would say personally, how I would interpret that weeping simply is this. Even though pain, suffering, and death are a part of this life, it does not mean God enjoys watching us go through it. Don't forget that. Do share your own interpretations with me in the comments below. See you soon after episode 8.